But let's go ahead and get started. I went ahead and shared my screen, a couple quick housekeeping items, and we'll kind of get running. I think my goal is usually to try to stay within about 30-minute mark, maybe a few minutes longer. That way, if there's tons of questions, I want to make sure we can make these as responsive and engaging as possible. I mean, the whole idea behind today's webinar is to create a modern and engaging award program. We should try to be as engaging as we can here as well. I think I'm going to work a little bit backwards. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of start with a really quick introduction of first off who I am and what we do here at Reviewer. And that kind of helps set the stage for why today's conversation. This is actually kind of a follow-up to last month's webinar we hosted, very specifically for associations around how do we kind of attract and retain a younger demographic of membership. I think, working with so many membership-based associations, there's kind of this shared challenge that we're all running into, right? Of an aging demographic, and that's not a bad thing, but for long-term sustainability, how do we start to tie in and connect them at an earlier stage in their life cycle? So we kind of talked about running 30 under 30 awards or those types of campaigns or member of the year, new member of the year, et cetera. And in that conversation, we really kind of got into like what would be kind of like desired the perfect award structure, if you can kind of make that bold statement. And how do you kind of create a very modern and engaging program? So my background, so my name is Kyle. I'm the CEO here at Reviewer. I started the company, or our team started the company back in about 2012. And we did so from a rather bizarre perspective. We were part of the volunteer review committee for a wide variety of not just these types of programs, but also scholarships, grants, investments, and things like that. So we lived kind of two lives. The first, which was paper-based. So if you think through your programs, and I'm trying to say relatively broad, looking at some of the names here, I know some of you, there are award programs, there are scholarships, there's a conference call for abstracts, so a wide variety of campaigns. But we were the ones who were reviewing these types of applications via paper. So literally hundreds and hundreds of binders being mailed to our doorstep. And as you can imagine, as a volunteer, like that's like the definition of what modern isn't. And it was extremely overwhelming, time consuming, and tedious. But then the problem was we saw organizations go online. Now, again, there's a reason why I'm telling you the story. And that was a combination of using their AMSs, which are great tools, but they're not really meant for these programs. Built-in web forms, they're downloading of documents, there's a lot of emails or spreadsheets, and more spreadsheets. And at its core, every one of those tools is online, right? So we think through like, how do we provide a very modern and engaging program? We think online. Well, the challenge is that none of these programs, right, are meant for the task at hand. So as a review committee member, while we were doing some things online, it didn't have all the tools that we needed to be successful. So we found ourselves still working offline, a lot of exporting, a lot of recompiling of information. And anytime you start to go down that route, two really significant challenges presented themselves. The first of which was lost information, right? It's inevitable that if you're downloading, exporting, recompiling, something along the way is going to get misplaced or lost. Even worse is that we found some programs that were collecting applications or submissions via email with a bunch of attachments would go to things like spam filters, and teams would actually sit down, go through entire review and selections just to find out months later that they didn't even review all the candidates because they were sitting in spam. So now it's not only a really bad look on the organization, it's unfair to the applicants, we're running into compliance problems, et cetera. The other thing we started to see was very clear biases being put forth by other committee members, maybe even us included, where we had no way to redact information, and so we were reading through these applications. We knew who the applicants were, and it may have clouded our judgment. So that's kind of what led us to build Reviewer as an online platform to kind of full circle run these campaigns, the entire life cycle of them, from literally start to finish. Now, again, part of what I love doing here at Reviewer is obviously, we have a great software, been doing this now for many, many years. But I'm not even joking, thousands of these conversations every single year. And so I think we like to keep our ear on the ground as kind of a pulse of what's happening. So emerging trends, industry best practices, and our kind of the name of the game is every single month bringing together a bunch of like-minded individuals and just share things that we're seeing happen. So on the scholarship side of things, or on the award side of things, the challenge that we're kind of running into here is how do we kind of tie in multiple components to a program? So nominator nominee processes, references, managing file uploads, how do you ensure a fair, non-biased review and selection process? Some of you may be doing public voting or like a public showcasing of applicants. So how do you kind of tie all of that type of stuff into a campaign? I am keeping an eye on the chat. So I think somebody had mentioned that they're only hearing every other word. If that is an issue, please do let me know. I can switch over to another headset. I am using our podcasting mic today, so hopefully that isn't the case. Very, very expensive microphone, so it should be working. But please do let me know if you can't hear me. Great. Thanks everyone for chiming in. So my goal today is I want to make this as engaging as possible. I'm a very visual person. I also kind of love just to ramble and kind of go with the flow. So any comments or questions that you guys have, please do toss them in the chat. We'll address them as we go. We can save them for the end. It's up to you. With that said, I want to kind of visualize all these topics. My goal today is not to show you the ins and outs of Reviewer by no means. We will use Reviewer to showcase these theories, but I do want to kind of use it to kind of help show, some of these different concepts. So with all that said, let's go ahead and jump into the very first kind of discussion point today, which is what I would consider to be kind of the ideal submission experience. And that's what I call breaking the nomination workflow into two, a nominator experience and then a nominee experience. I'm going to show this to you. Now, again, we have 40 plus people on the call today, so many of you might be doing scholarships and grants. That's totally fine. I am going to try to tie some of that in as well, but today's main focus is like member recognition awards. So the reason why I love this workflow is from a marketing perspective, because that's what I am. I'm a marketer. Is I'm always trying to think through like how do we increase volume and get the awareness out there for these campaigns. And so by breaking your process into two, a nominator portion and a nominee portion, you're actually solving two very critical challenges. So if you lower the barrier, so who are you nominating, and why, you have such a simple application structure that it takes people no time to fill out. It's also a peer nomination, right? So you're putting forth other people's names. You're building this giant marketing list of potential nominees. From there, what's going to happen is we want to notify the nominees, and you can do this randomly, you can do this anonymously, and let them know like, hey, you were nominated for this year's XYZ category or for this year's 30 under 30. Click here to quote unquote accept your nomination. So think of it like your Oscars, your Emmy awards where you accept a nomination. They then themselves are the ones who are doing the bulk of the award application. And the reason why that's so critical is because at the core of it, you need to make sure that data is very, very accurate. Who knows themselves better than themselves? So you basically are putting the bulk of the effort and the energy levels themselves on the nominees, but you're using an open call for nominations to kind of increase volume and send out those notifications themselves. It's also critical, and I always use this analogy. Hopefully my wife never listens to one of these webinars. I love her to death, but if I was to nominate her for an award versus she nominate me, her nomination would be better. And it's not that I think she doesn't love me more than her. It's the fact that she's just a much better writer than I am. And so the question that comes into play, is that a fair representation on the nominee, or is it the effort levels of the nominator? We're going to come back to that because that's also kind of a core concept with things like references as well. So by having that dual process nominator nominee, it also makes sure that when you go to do a review and selection process, you really are comparing apples to apples. So with all that said, I want to kind of visualize and showcase what that would look like, because again, this is kind of creating this modern application structure. But I did pose some pretty significant challenges to you. And that's the sense that now you have a list of nominators, nominees, you have file uploads, you've got essays, you might have references. So how on earth are you going to consolidate that into one hub? So jumping over to Reviewer, I did pull in this example here the National Association of Realtors 30 under 30 awards. So let's take a quick look at that. And the reason why I pulled this example is they are doing that dual nominator nominee process. So the way that this basically works is we want to create cohesiveness with your branding and with your audience. So most of our clients are using their existing websites. People go there, they learn about the program, and then they put a giant link that says, click here to apply or click here to submit. That link is then what transitions them to Reviewer. Now, when I talk about like a modern process, it all starts with this component right here. There are so many moving pieces to an award, grant, scholarship, fellowship, board nomination, conference, you name it. You have people, in this case, you've got multiple people. You've got maybe many, many nominators and then one nominee. You have file uploads, submission forms. Some of you may be collecting additional data from the nominees, which I'm going to come back to as well. There's communication, there's judging and scoring processes. And so how do you take all of those moving parts and centralize them into one place? Because what you physically can't be doing is downloading, exporting, and recompiling, or even worse, using a platform for part of this process and then using other tools for the follow-ups. So in Reviewer, it all starts with a profile. Generally speaking, the one that's doing the bulk of the submission creates a profile, and it holds on to all of the activities that relate to them. So in this example, we come in here, we tell us who they are, And then again, this is that dual process. And again, the idea is to lower the barrier. So think through like your selection criteria in your selection process. What's the absolute bare minimum that you need to make a very fair, non-biased, informed selection? And that's what you want to collect here. Nothing more, nothing less. So the idea is, again, from the nominator's perspective, really lower the barrier. Who are you? Who are you nominating? And then why? That's it. Again, there's two main goals here. One, we're getting a list of potential nominees. And then number two is we are getting kind of a nice little marketing snapshot, right? In 2 to 3 sentences, why are you nominating them? Now, this is where the beauty happens, because what happens now is it'll send an email notification to the nominee. And it'd say, hey, so-and-so, you've been, in this case, nominated for this year's 30 Under 30 Awards. Click here to begin your application. So now we've actually opened the door to one-to-one communication with our nominees, or in your case, to your membership, right? Who doesn't want more opportunity to connect and engage with them? So we have this open door, one-to-one communication with them. It brings them into the nomination structure. Now, again, in theory, this is completely customizable. So whatever your form questions are, we can mimic here. This is just the 30 under 30 that I'm showing you. Again, we want to lower the barrier and kind of eliminate any potential human error. So we already know what award category or what award this individual is nominated for. So there's really no need to ask them, right? It'll do it for us. If you want them to self-select their award categories, you can. I like to create what I call a very personalized experience. So what I mean by that is when the applicant answers a series of questions, it can kind of dictate the follow-up questions. It'll create auto categorization for you. But again, it seems like really, really small things. We want the option to save, to log out, to come back later. In this example, I want to waste anybody's time applying for a program that they're not even eligible for. So in this example, it's obviously a 30 under 30. So if you're 36 years old, which is what I am, then you're not even eligible. So that way, when they proceed on, it actually lets them know that, hey, you're not eligible. So it saves your staff time vetting people. It also doesn't waste the applicant's time. Now, if they were eligible, then it kind of releases them and lets them proceed on. So bigger picture, for those of you that have multiple programs, it's very common for applicants to not even know what program they should be applying for. Some of them might have very, very specific criteria. So maybe you want to consider building in like an eligibility criteria where the system would say, hey, based on what you just put into the system, these are the 3 award categories or the 3 scholarships or the 2 grants that you best align with. Whichever all of them do you want to apply for? And then from there, it kind of releases the application. Now, again, you can create separate forms. So if you have 10 different award categories, each of the 10 categories might have completely different award submission forms, different judging committees, different scorecards. We're actually setting the stage now to do all of that automatically for you. So again, it doesn't get much more modern than that. From an applicant's perspective, again, we're asking for information about who they are. This is obviously a very transactional program, so it's asking for like real estate information. The reason why I wanted to pull this was, again, to show that dual process, but also the file upload. So again, you don't want to waste people's time. You also want to make sure that you're being supportive to any file uploads that they might have. So within Reviewer, you can take in virtually any file type. I'm going to show this to you, but we embed all of them. So what that means is I don't care if it's a video file or an image or a PowerPoint or a spreadsheet. I also don't care if you're using a Mac or a tablet or a PC. It creates consistency because everybody can view those files directly in Reviewer side by side with all of your note-taking tools. So again, we don't want to worry about not having the right type of file formats that we can't access later on. When it gets into things like short answers and essay prompts, this is where, for me as a marketer, I get kind of excited because my gut tells me that nobody's going to sit down at one time to do this. They're going to get to this question right here. They're going to answer maybe 3 or 4 of them. If I scroll through here, you're going to see that there are kind of a lot of questions that this organization is asking, and they're all required. So for me, I'm probably going to answer 3 or 4 of them. I'm going to save. I'm going to log out. I'm going to come back later. Again, we're creating a very, very good experience for the applicant. Now on the back end, which I'll show this to you, you're actually tracking what's going on. So you can see in real time, and I'm sure you've all seen this, most people will procrastinate. They're gonna, if your deadline is 3 o'clock on a Thursday, they're applying at 2:55. So it allows you to track and monitor in real time who started these processes, how far have they made it. You can send them automated reminder messages, you can do email templates, and you can actually watch your conversion metrics go from in progress to fully submitted. But this is the type of stuff that I want to see where I know we're going to have drop off here. So let's just basically prevent that from happening by offering them the ability to save, log out, and come back later. I'm going to ask a quick question in the chat, or I'll ask it, and then you guys can kind of do a quick little thumbs up here. Who does references? So the question here comes, this is an emerging trend that we're starting to find. So I think there's a react button on that chat. So kind of give it a thumbs up or something if you do that. The concept of a reference would be asking somebody externally to either answer a series of questions or fill out a letter of support on behalf of the applicant. I'm going to keep kind of going through this, but if you're not doing that, we can kind of not come back to it. But again, talk about a modern application process here. One of the biggest challenges that organizations face when they're collecting external references or supporting material is that they're very challenging to write. It's being asked the very, very last minute. You're asking somebody to sit down from scratch and write a full-blown letter. It's a very 1999 concept. And so the challenge here is that they're probably going to end up regurgitating and using an old template. So what I would instead do is in Reviewer, you put in like the first name and last name of the person doing the reference, and actually it'll trigger an email notification. So it'd say, hey, so-and-so, you've been asked to write a reference on behalf of Kyle, click here to do so. From there, it actually allows them to fill it out smack dab in the system. Now you can still totally do reference letters. I don't want to change any processes, but kind of the emerging trend that we're finding here is instead of doing a reference upload or letter, instead ask your reference to answer a series of questions. In this example, they're actually asking the reference to rank the candidate on a series of kind of milestones. But what I would probably do instead is like, what are the 3 to 4 kind of essay prompts you want the references to answer? This works really, really well because it allows the reference to also save and log out and come back later. It lowers the barrier. They're simply answering the questions that show up in front of them, but then also creates data consistency. So I mentioned beforehand, the challenge with nominations is sometimes some people just submit better nominations and it's not a reflection of the candidate. Same thing happens here. And so the idea is that now you're comparing apples to apples because every single applicant has the same kind of essay prompts or same reference questions answered about them. I'm going to come back to this a bit more because you're probably all wondering, okay, well, this is great and all, but how on earth do we manage that? Because I don't want to have a bunch of external references now sitting out there in no man's land that I have to kind of follow up with. So I am going to come back to that. So again, the entire, to summarize this, we want to create these interactive experiences where the applicants don't really realize that they're filling out these forms. We don't want these processes and these programs to be transactional. We want nominators to come in, lower the barrier, build up this giant marketing list. We want to open the door to one-to-one communication with the nominees. We want to empower the nominees to kind of put forth their best self, right? So empowering them to create their best nomination packet and less so getting bogged down and like, okay, I have to convert this to a PowerPoint or a PDF. I have to email it back with a bunch of attachments. They're just logging in, they're interacting with the system, and then when they're done, they're done. Now, again, long term, if you ever want applicants to come back and submit additional deliverables, we'll save this for a future topic. Again, it's all about lowering the barrier. Maybe, so if I advance one slide here, you're going to see a giant image pop up. So this example, this organization is asking for a photo of the applicants. They're doing things like e-signatures, they're doing video uploads. This might be things that you don't need right away. So if you have, I'm going to make up a simple number, 100 nominations, maybe you want to save that for the final 20, right? And so you kind of go through a pre-review, you vet people, you go through selections, and then you ask like the top 20 to come back to reviewer. They're then presented with a top 20 form. So they upload their URLs, they upload their photos, all that kind of fun stuff. And then that way you're not asking for these kind of robust files from everybody, just those that kind of proceeded on in the process. So the next thing that I want to look at, I'm going to merge a couple slides together, is going to be the review and selection process. Because again, the goal of a reviewer is kind of 3 parts. So number 1 is that we have to make the experience as enjoyable and lower barrier for applicants. We want to make your lives easier, right? So we're all mission-driven groups. You guys wear a lot of different hats. How do I help you spend less time in spreadsheets and emails and downloading of documents on Wednesday nights when you should be focused on your families? And then also the third piece of the puzzle is the review and selection team, because for many of you, they are volunteers. And so as much as I want to save you time, you actually make up like a third of the program. The applicants and then those committees make up a much larger percentage of it. So if we kind of sit here and think through, okay, what does a modern program look like? I think we just knocked it out of the park on the application side of things. But then what about that other demographic, which is your volunteers, which are equal, if not more important? And the way I like to think through that is two things. One is that, again, what does the usability look like? But then also, how do we create this kind of well-structured program where we're ensuring that the best candidates are being selected, we're redacting information, we're hiding demographic details, right? We're using things like score sheets, all that kind of fun stuff. So the first piece to the puzzle in this kind of matrix is you have all these award nominations coming in. How do you decide who's going to be reviewing who? So for many of you, you might have a team that's in charge of reviewing literally every nomination. That's totally fine. Although what I will tell you is based off a recent study that we did, on average, most volunteer review committees don't want to read more than 15 to 20 submissions because after 20, their energy levels drop off pretty dramatically, which has a pretty significant impact on the results. Because then the question comes into play, how does the first candidate that they reviewed compare to the 30th candidate that they reviewed if their energy drops off? So if that is the case, how do we create these review structures or these review workflows where we're ensuring that every candidate or applicant gets reviewed enough times, right? But also that we're not overwhelming our volunteer review committees. Now, what I would argue is that having a system that is super efficient allows them to maybe score more people than that, but we still have to be careful. So I treat this through a series of buckets or pods. So I like to create these review pods where I build up these committees or these teams who are in charge of reviewing kind of subsets of your submissions. So if you guys are doing multiple different kind of awards, I would create maybe a bucket per award and then having kind of a dedicated team in charge of reviewing it. You also may want to consider doing phased review where you have like an initial vetting phase, which is a simple thumbs up, thumbs down, high level review. You take the top X number and advance them to phase two. That has a completely different team in charge of scoring them. And you kind of keep rinsing and repeating that process. And then the other thing that I want to kind of layer on here before I jump back into reviewer is how do you actually conduct the review? So we have to be very, very careful where if you have, I think the larger your programs, the bigger this issue becomes, is you don't want to give your review team free reign, right? We can't say, hey, subjectively go review a bunch of people and then kind of come back to us with your top 10 because it becomes very subjective and how do they get down to the top 10? So we want to make sure that we're leveraging some type of series of score sheets or scorecards. So the idea is to leverage like mathematic rubrics that they're filling out that kind of automatically builds out these leaderboards and these ranking tools for you. And then that in itself will power those subjective deliberation meetings, or maybe that is the end all be all. And so those score sheets have to be efficient, right? I don't want your volunteers downloading documents, going and viewing them in another platform, opening up a spreadsheet, typing in some numbers, having to package it back to you. We want them to come in, review some information, log their comments, log their notes, save, come back later and finish it on. And I want those leaderboards built automatically for you. I really don't want to see you guys playing in spreadsheets and running formulas. I think we're all experts in Excel at this point, but how do we remove ourselves from these overly complex processes? So with all that said, I really want to visualize that for you because I think this is really the bread and butter of these types of programs. So in Reviewer, right off the bat, you will get this command center. And I wanted to start here because a few of you did kind of raise your hand when it came to references. And the reason why is in real time, you can track what's going on. So humans will always procrastinate. So it's going to show you exactly how many entries you've received, where are they in the process. As your deadline approaches, you can actually send them automations, you can send them reminder messages. But equally important, it shows you how many outstanding references have also been requested. Are they done or are they not done? And it allows you to send them reminders as well. I'm also very aware that these programs aren't black and white. So if you have to modify deadlines or extend deadlines or open things back up, you can do so on the fly from your dashboards. I also want to make sure that you guys are staying ahead of the curve and keeping an eye on what's happening. And so if you want to kind of track and monitor in real time, communication, the ability to do so. So I want to visualize that profile concept for you guys. Again, this is kind of the bread and butter of Reviewer, but also I think through, again, a modern application structure that's no more PowerPoints and spreadsheets and documents, it's profiles. So in Reviewer, you can actually sort and filter by your many different kind of award categories, your submission statuses, and you basically get this nice menu system of all of your submissions. From here, when you open them up, it kind of goes back to our roots of our physical binders that were mailed to us. The only difference is that they're not physical binders, they're now virtual. So I have Ryan here. Ryan is my nominee, and it shows me right in the center of my page all the content and deliverables collected about Ryan. So I have essays, I have links, I've got file uploads. If I scroll through here, I've got some photos, I have some headshots, I've got absolutely everything embedded right smack dab in front of me. Now, what I can do is I can one-to-one communicate with my applicants if I want to. Again, so there's a built-in communication tool. I can internally collaborate with my team. So I can leave you guys notes and comments. We can virtually collaborate with one another. That lives on the applicant's profile. I don't have to worry about the applicant seeing it. It stays very, very private. If I want to look at those file uploads, I just simply go to the attachment section and then I press view, and then that file will embed itself right in front of me. So again, this could be photos, videos, PowerPoints, Excel documents, PDFs, whatever you can dream up. But again, the goal here is that you never have to physically download and export anything. You just simply go to the applicant's profile and then you view the files directly in the system. And then again, for those of you that did say you are collecting references, very similar, it shows you a list, right, of everybody who submitted a reference. And then when I press the view button, it actually shows me the reference that in this case, Frederick filled out. So again, we take all the moving parts that go into these campaigns and we consolidate them into one hub. Now to backtrack a little bit, one other kind of exciting use case here under this section would be what if Ryan was nominated by 6 different people? It could actually show you a list, right, of all 6 people that nominated Ryan. And then when you press the view button next to their name, it would show you what they said about him. So lots and lots of ways to kind of consolidate this, but this is where the magic happens because now we no longer have to worry about sharing with your review team elements of a profile, forms, file uploads, references, nominations. What we're going to do now is we actually take the profile itself, and that's what gets shared with our teams. And so to do so, we create those pods. So this is what I call like a bucketing system. I think this is a pretty good job showcasing what I'm talking about, where if you had like 6 different award categories, you might have one bucket per category. Maybe you want to kind of have multiple phases of review, which is kind of what you can see here, where there's 4 separate categories, a top 50, and then a finalist. Why this works so well is that when the applicants are submitting nominations, it'll drop the applicant into whatever bucket they belong to. And then from there, you can start to assign it out to a team. So whenever Simon, Paula, and Mark come into reviewer, they're physically only going to have access to the submissions in their bucket. Whenever Sally, Sue, and Steve come into reviewer, they're only going to see the submissions in their bucket. So again, historically speaking, what you're probably doing, if you're not using a platform like this, is you're like creating like Google Drive links and you're trying to fill up with spreadsheets, you're putting a bunch of folders in there and you're trying to share individual folders with people. Now what you're doing is assigning them to these buckets. The other thing I didn't talk about that I wanted to address now is the compliance behind this. So again, a lot of times your staff or committees may know who applicants are. So not only do I prefer to see some private information redacted if that's your desired process, but also how do you randomly assign submissions to your staff? So do you remember when I mentioned that on average, most judges can't really review more than say 20 submissions? Well, if that is the case, how do you do that? So in a reviewer, if I open up my buckets, it actually shows me a listing of every single applicant. It also shows me a list of how many submissions they're reviewing and who's being reviewed by who. So what I could actually do here, bear with me, what I can do is I can bulk select my submissions and I can type in give every submission to 6 evaluators. Or I could say give every reviewer maybe no more than 20 submissions, but no less than 10. And literally the system will take your submissions, equally and randomly distribute it out. And then from there, you can actually override it. So I can pick and choose on a per person basis who's going to be reviewing who. So really powerful things here. Again, taking giant groups of submissions and kind of narrowing it down into teams of review, or you can assign that to everybody. And then from there, starting to use automation that can randomly distribute submissions to your team. Now, what happens next? So when your review team comes in to conduct a review, again, the idea is to create the entire modern experience for everybody, not just applicants. So your volunteers would basically come into the system. They would then see a menu of all of the applicants that are in charge of reviewing. You can redact information, you can kind of modify what this would look like, but the review team simply clicks on the name or ID of the applicant, and then they get this really nice split screen. So when I mentioned before that they can't review maybe more than 20, I would argue that having this model actually equips them for success to review a higher volume because it's so simple. Now, again, it's largely dependent on the complexities of your program. But the idea here is that your volunteers can simply log in, side by side, compare the nomination packet to the selection tool. Your selection tool is custom, but again, I want to make sure that we're leveraging some type of mathematic-based rubric. And so in this example, the review team can, again, side by side, look at the attachments, they can read through the form. Since it is side by side, they can actually have the file show up next to the file uploads or the score sheet. They can leave notes, they can look at those references, and then they answer a series of questions. Now, once this score sheet is submitted, the judges or the volunteers will basically move on to the next, but you get this menu system. And that menu system basically shows you a list of every single nominee on a per award or per bucket basis. It shows you the committee that reviewed them, how they individually scored, how they collectively scored. It shows you average scores. So for many of you, you may actually leverage this list as a way to make your selections. So if I'm taking like my top 3 per category or my top 1 even, it'll show you from high to low that Ryan is my highest rated, Sheldon, and then Richard. Some of you might have a multi-phase program, so I can select my top X number of people, and then at the bottom, I simply with one click just advance them from one phase to the next until ultimately you have a decision. Now, what I do want to pause on here again is this isn't necessarily a modern experience, but it kind of helps bring a modern touch to these programs. And that's kind of how do you visualize what's happening? And what I'm saying here is if you have a random review process, that typically implies that not every applicant's being reviewed by the same people. So then my first question, and I can kind of see it happening here, is okay, well, Mark scored Sheldon a 12. So did Mark just really not like that nomination? Or what if Mark has never given higher than a 15? So by Mark's personal standards, he actually scored Sheldon very, very good. However, in comparison to Judge Judy or somebody else, he scored quite low, and that applicant's being penalized for it. So in Reviewer, we actually have this really cool report that I want to show you that basically does this. I'm trying to jump ahead a little bit, but it basically will show you each individual judge's personal trends. This is a real client, real data that's been redacted. And it shows you that Judge Judy on average scores about a 24, but Tony on average scores about a 34. So literally anybody that is scored by Tony scores a full 10 points higher. That just inherently means that they're going to be higher in the ranking list. That's not fair, or it is overly beneficial. So in Reviewer, we actually can leverage this information to create a normalization. So what happens here, you can kind of see it off to the right, is it basically will replace the judges' scores. So if you got scored a 24, you're now average, which is 1. So the end result will look something like this. Bruce is our highest rated nominee. Bruce on average scores 1.15 times higher than average, whereas Elon is almost 20% lower than average. So it doesn't really matter how each individual judge is scoring. They can be as strict or as easy as they want. We're basically going to take their own personal averages and compare it to one another. So I want to make sure I show that to you guys because that is kind of a hot topic and an emerging trend that we've started to see. The last thing I want to showcase for you guys today is publicly celebrating your nominations and then also maybe doing a public vote. Because a lot of times when we look at these programs, it's back-end private judging and selection processes. But if the idea is to create a modern experience, but also engage your broader membership base, how do you do that? So we actually have a public selection interface in our system. And the way that it works is it allows you to pick and choose who shows up here. So for those of you that don't want to do public voting, that's fine. Many people will do this as a way to A, showcase award recipients, or B, showcase finalists. And it'll pull content from the applicant's profile. The reason why I say it'll pull from the profile is you might be collecting, say, for example, 30 pieces of data, and you want only 3 of that to show up. You can control that. So in this example, it shows like a headshot of the nominee. It tells us who they are, and then like a brief abstract of who they are. When I open it up, it shows the public profile of that member or of that nominee. So in this example, it's who they are, and then kind of a high level about section. So again, this might be a 50-page application form. You just target whatever you want to show up here. Now, why this is cool is off to the left is a gallery. So if you have videos, they'll play, images will show up. So it allows people to kind of publicly visualize and view your nominees. And if you are incorporating a public vote, you just have the nominator, or sorry, the public voter tell us who they are. That way you're able to build a list of your voters. That might be really nice marketing collateral, and then they can go ahead and cast their vote. So for many of our clients, they will do one of two things, or really one of three things. They have like a fan favorite or a member favorite. So it's a completely separate winner on a per category basis. Or they may weight this separately. So they might give like the public voting a 5% weight and then the formal judging a 95% weight. So you guys can do whatever you want with that. But I want to make sure that I leave ample time for Q&A here today. Hopefully I did a good job showcasing a lot of these theories within Reviewer, and just to continue to reiterate the concept of a profile. It's so important with these types of campaigns. We really need to, as we approach 2025, as we look at the demographic of our audience and of our applicants, really our daily lives. Like, we want to be using technology and tools, but we also want to make sure that we're using the right tools for the task at hand. We want to make sure that we're avoiding sending people to spreadsheets or gallery of documents, or using our AMSs or our built-in web forms, and using a dedicated tool for the task at hand that just overarching elevates the experience, but then on the back end creates efficiencies. It ensures data security and privacy. It ensures compliance and all that kind of fun stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and pause there. I'll mute myself. I do have the chat open, so any questions I can answer about anything today, about the platform, about trends, about best practices, please do let me know and make sure I'm being a resource to everybody. Great. Yeah, two really good questions came in. So the first one that came in was around how the biggest challenges with follow-ups and notifying the nominator and or the nominee that they've been selected. So I would say a couple different things. Yes, the Reviewer does have a significant number of automated notifications and messages that can go out. You can do it based off of status changes, all different types of triggers. What I would say though is, since February of 2024, email communication for everybody has been challenging. A lot of messages get quarantined, they go to spam, and there's nothing we can do about that. Again, that's impacting people at a personal level as well as a corporate perspective. So it's one of the reasons why I also love a concept called a proof of process. And you want to make sure that that's a very publicly available statement, make sure they can see that on the website. And a proof of process basically says, look, if you're applying or nominating to this program, here's what it's going to look like. And it starts by saying, here's our dates and deadlines. It says, we're going to notify people by these days. It tells us that, hey, we're going to have a random review. We're going to redact data. We're going to use the score sheet. And there's two benefits to that. Number one is it kind of sets expectations. So in this case, people know when to expect notifications. Number two is if people are wondering, hey, was this a fair process, or did you follow the proof? You have a tool in place to back it up. So with some of our communication tools, you can actually log notes about a candidate on their profile. What that means is that messaging will live on. It'll use email notifications, et cetera, to notify them. But if for whatever reason it got blocked, they at any time can log in and view that message. It doesn't prevent them from physically reading it. So that way, if you guys do phone calls or other types of communication, you could do a giant email blast that says, hey, the results are in. All they need to do is log back in, and then they can see that communication. So again, I want to hit them from multiple fronts. I don't want to rely on just one form of communication, but also we have to make sure that if something gets blocked, that whatever we're trying to communicate to them can still be accessible by just logging into a platform. So yeah, leverage automation and then leverage multiple means of messaging. It might even be SMS, right, in text messaging. From a pricing perspective. So I want to address two things. So if that question is more so like to Reviewer, like how do we price? Our subscription is based off of two variables. The first of which is going to be a subscription, and then the second of which is a count of the number of submissions that you receive. So we have a tiered pricing model where the price will fall based on the number of submissions that you receive. That's going to be a little bit different. So what I would say is, if you want to have a chat more about like the number of submissions that you have, we can have that conversation offline. I can kind of give you a calculator and we can kind of run through that. It also spurred a good question on potentially charging applicants. So many associations are leveraging their award programs as a way to generate non-due revenue. And so we actually have an integration with PayPal Payments Pro that allows you to have obviously a paid submission model. that works really well because it creates a shopping cart concept. And so you can have quite a few different pricing structures: member versus non-member, late fee versus early fee. You can offer discounts based on the number of submissions that they have. And then basically the entire award submission, review selection, and payment model is all structured under one hub. So I want to make sure I also address that because I didn't bring it up earlier and that kind of reminded me. But again, going back to like how a reviewer is priced, I like to have that kind of conversation. But again, there's two variables. There's a subscription, which allows you to use this for unlimited use, and then it basically will count up the number of submissions that are powered by the platform. Integrations with the existing APIs. Yeah. So it largely depends on like what the integration is going to look like. It could be like a single sign-on with an AMS, those types of things. Again, that's more of a discussion I like to have on what the tool are, what your expectation is with integrations. Reviewer is a robust system, and so it does allow you to do things like that. Generally speaking, most integrations aren't necessary. Reviewers are very out of the box system that already works kind of in conjunction with your AMSs or other types of tools. But if there's further integration needs, we'll be able to identify what that would look like. So yeah, question came in: can a reviewer be used to score candidates for a job instead of an award? Yeah, executive search for peer review panels. Yeah, 100%. So at the end of the day, today's conversation, I tried, and maybe I bounced around a little bit too much, and that maybe on me. A lot of the associations and organizations we work with will use reviewer for multiple use cases. Any type of application-based review and selection process we're used by. So awards, grants, scholarships, fellowships, board nominations, abstracts. It could be peer reviews, scientific papers, or in this case, jobs or even like internships as well. Now, the content you're collecting from the candidates will be different. How you conduct the review and selection will be different, but that's kind of where the bread and butter reviewer comes into play. Is all of those campaigns and all of those use cases have three core consistencies, right? There's a submitter, operation team, and then a selection process. And then nested within each one of them, we have all the kind of core components of reviewer that are highly configurable for the task at hand. We do a ton of fellowships and internships that I think would relate really well to you for that question. So again, I'd love to have that kind of conversation to maybe talk more about what your desired process would look like. Copy this recording. Yeah, totally. So probably not today. Our team will take this and we'll convert it into more bite-sizable pieces. So we'll convert it to a blog. We'll have kind of sections and text and interactive tours and videos that kind of go through all the core components to a modern and engaging award program. And obviously, I'm not naive that many of you guys here are on two different spectrums, or maybe a combination of both, where you're doing these programs and you're just looking for best practices and insights that you can take and apply to your programs right away. Others are looking for that, but also potentially a platform to help power it. And so again, if you want to kind of dive deeper into what your specific programs look like and how that would translate within reviewer in a less generalized environment, would love to have those conversations. The end goal from here is how do I help provide as much value to you guys as much as possible. So if there's questions or I can answer for you around trends or best practices or auditing of programs, love to do it. If you want to dive deeper into our background at reviewer and how it would apply to your program, would also love that opportunity. I'm here for you guys. But yeah, we'll be sending that out sometime this week for sure. And what I'll say too is, as I'm waiting for more questions to come in, some of the names here I do recognize. Some of you also have like your association acronyms in there. The beauty of a reviewer, and again, I have thousands of these conversations every year, and so probably even more than that. We're working with Ivy League universities. We work with massive membership-based associations. We work with very, very small charitable foundations and family foundations. We work with credit unions. We work with banks. We work with hospitals. We work with government institutions. We've seen so many things and so many different use cases that I used to say by now I've seen pretty much everything, and I really think I have. I used to also say that like there's no right or wrong way of running these programs, but now I say, there's a lot of wrong ways to run the programs, but there's also more right ways to run them. And so part of our implementation and onboarding process at Reviewer is really kind of looking at like, what is it you're doing now? What do you want to do? What do you want to do 3 years from now? Taking that process and kind of mimicking it in a reviewer, but then also allowing us to look at our features. Because, I'm going to make up a simple number. If we have 100 features, maybe like 5 of them are not relevant for most of you, but for some of you, those 5 features are total game changers. And so how do we at Reviewer kind of uncover like what those features are to make sure that you're maximizing the most that we have to offer? But then also saying, hey, we have XYZ client that does something very, very similar, but they're also doing this. Are you interested in incorporating that? And the name of the game is basically how do we take your background and our background and kind of mesh them together to maximize the most the platform has to offer, but also just our expertise. I mean, I would say collectively with everybody in the call, and we've got dozens and dozens of years of experience, and there's no shortage of that. So yeah, I think we do take a pretty hands-on approach in the setup process for that purpose. What other questions? I mean, we still have a couple dozen people here, so I really do. Again, you guys are rock stars. I really appreciate your time today. I'm not going to end it right now. I'll wait till obviously you guys are ready, but appreciate you guys attending. I really appreciate your participation. You guys are what make these webinars beneficial for your own peers. So other topics or things that you're seeing within the space, that's how we power these webinars. Again, this is a follow-up to a webinar we hosted last week or last month. But we'd love to get your insights and feedback. And if we don't have the expertise or the staff, between our AMSs or our association management companies, there's an abundance of resources out there that will make sure that we can align them to make sure we bring to you guys a good topic. So again, really appreciate everybody's time today. What other questions can I answer? All right, I think we're getting pretty quiet here. So it's kind of that last late afternoon. Either people are getting hungry, people need more caffeine, or people are checked out for the day with this. Maybe a combination of all of it. So again, I really appreciate your guys' time today. I will personally be sending a follow-up to every single one of you. Again, I can't overemphasize how appreciative I am of you guys attending these. We do this for you. So I know we talked about coffee vouchers. Those should all be delivered here shortly if you haven't already got them. But whatever I can do for any of you to be a resource, please don't ever hesitate to ask. And again, I appreciate your time today, and I look forward to next month's topic, whatever that ends up being. So kind of keep an eye out. Those reminders and those invites will be coming here probably relatively shortly as well. So thank you so much, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your week.